The number on my screen was 41. 41 missed calls while I was sitting in a federal courthouse waiting room in downtown Chicago, unable to touch my phone for 6 hours because my attorney had told me to keep it off during the deposition prep. My brother's bankruptcy case had dragged our family into it somehow. Long story, not mine to tell. And I'd been called in as a witness for something I hadn't even been part of. I was 33 years old, a surgical billing specialist at a mid-size hospital, and the most dramatic thing that had ever happened to me before that day was a dispute over a parking spot at the Whole Foods on Michigan Avenue. I turned my phone back on at 4:17 in the afternoon, standing outside the courthouse in February, air cold enough to make your eyes water. The notifications loaded slowly. My sister first, 7 calls. Then my mom, 14. Then numbers I didn't recognize, which scared me more than anything else, because strangers don't usually call in a crisis. They call when something has already happened, and they need to tell you about it. I thought my dad had died. That was my first thought. He'd had 2 stents put in the previous spring, and his cardiologist had been cautious in a way that made everyone in our family nervous. I pressed play on my mom's first voicemail with my coat half unzipped, and the wind cutting right through me. Her voice was fine, not grieving, not panicked, clipped and slightly impatient, like she was calling to remind me about a dentist appointment I'd forgotten. "Ivy, honey, I need you to call me back as soon as you can. We made a decision today and it's all going to make sense once you hear the whole thing. Just call me." A decision. That's what she said. We made a decision. I stood there for a long moment, traffic going by, a man walking a dog in a winter coat that matched his dog's coat, a perfectly normal Tuesday in February, and I had the specific animal feeling that something was very wrong. I called her back. She picked up before I even heard a full ring. Before she could even get through her greeting, I asked her what had happened. My voice came out steadier than I felt. She paused. Not a long pause, but enough of one that I noticed it. Then she said my father, and she had liquidated my investment account. I didn't say anything. I think I was waiting for the rest of the sentence. The part where she explained that this was temporary, or that there had been an emergency, or that they had somehow made an error and were going to fix it. Instead, she said, "We needed to cover your brother's legal fees before the filing deadline, and your account was the only liquid asset we could access in time. We still have signing authority from when you added us after your car accident 3 years ago. We knew you'd want to help your brother if you understood the full situation." I pulled the phone away from my ear and looked at it, like the device itself would explain to me what was happening. Then I put it back. $83,000. That's what the account had held. I'd been building it since I was 26, putting in $200 a month at first, then more when I got my raise, then a chunk from my grandmother's estate when she passed 2 years ago. The account had her name in my phone's notes. Grandma Ruth's money, plus mine. I'd been saving it for a down payment on a condo. I'd been looking at listings on the north side for the last 4 months. I had a folder on my laptop. I said, very quietly, that I needed to understand what she meant by liquidated. She said again, more slowly, like I was the one not following, that they had transferred the funds to cover the retainer for my brother's attorney and the court filing costs, that the deadline had been noon that day, that they hadn't been able to reach me and they couldn't wait. "I was gone for 6 hours, I said. "You couldn't wait 6 hours. She said it wasn't that simple. She said the attorney had given them a hard deadline. She said my brother was looking at real legal exposure, and they couldn't let that happen to him. She said she knew I'd understand once I thought about it, because I'd always been the responsible one in the family, which meant I was the one who could handle this." I want to sit with that sentence for a moment because I've thought about it many times since. You're the responsible one, which means you're the one who can handle this. As if being responsible your whole life is a debt you owe everyone around you. As if building something carefully and steadily just means you've created something that other people can take. I told my mom I would call her back. I hung up. I stood outside that courthouse for another 10 minutes, not crying, not moving much, just recalibrating. The way you have to recalibrate when the map you've been using turns out to be wrong. I called my bank first. Not my mom, not my sister, not my brother, the bank. I had the account number memorized because I'd stared at those statements often enough. The representative who answered was patient and professional and told me that yes, there had been a transfer authorized that morning at 9:52 a.m. using the secondary account holder credentials. My parents, who I'd added as secondary holders years ago for a specific limited reason that had nothing to do with this. I asked if the transfer could be reversed. She said she'd need to connect me with the fraud and dispute department, but that I should be aware that authorized transfers, meaning transfers made by individuals with legitimate account access, were typically more complex to recover than unauthorized ones. I said I understood. I asked to be connected. I sat in my car in the courthouse parking garage, heat blasting, working my way through 3 different departments before I got to a woman named Kira who was in the fraud escalation team. Kira had a voice that suggested she'd heard worse, and she walked me through exactly what they could and couldn't do. She explained that the key question was whether the secondary account authority was limited in scope or general. I told her I remembered adding my parents after my car accident because I'd been briefly incapacitated and my dad had needed to pay some bills for me. I'd meant it to be a short-term arrangement. I didn't remember ever formally limiting it in writing. Kira said that, without a documented restriction on the authority, the transfer was technically authorized. She said I could still file a dispute if I had evidence the transfer was made without my knowledge or consent, and that depending on the circumstances, there might be legal options outside of the bank's process. She said I should talk to an attorney. I sat in my car and did a calculation. The transfer had gone out that morning. It had gone to my brother's legal team, which meant it was already in the hands of a law firm. Getting money back from a law firm that had received it as a retainer for active litigation was not going to be fast or simple. I opened my phone and searched for financial fraud attorneys in Illinois. I want to be honest about the next part. I was not calm. I was shaking, not in a dramatic way, just in the way your body does when it's absorbing something large. My hands were slightly unsteady on my phone screen, but I kept moving because I knew if I stopped moving and just sat with what had happened, I would fall apart in a parking garage in February, and that would not help me. I found an attorney through a referral from a colleague who'd gone through a messy divorce the year before. Her name was Daphne Collier, and her firm listed financial exploitation and elder law as specialties, which was an odd fit for my situation. But when I read the firm's case descriptions, I saw they also handled unauthorized account transfers and family financial disputes. I sent an email from my car with a summary of what had happened, attaching the account access records I pulled from the bank's app. She called me back within the hour. Daphne didn't waste time on pleasantries. She asked me to walk her through the account setup from the beginning. When I'd added my parents, what I'd communicated about the purpose, whether there had been any written or digital record of a limited scope. I told her everything I remembered. Then she said something that made me sit very still. She said that in Illinois, when a secondary account holder uses access rights to transfer funds for their own benefit, or the benefit of a third party, without the primary holder's knowledge or consent, there is a potential claim for breach of fiduciary duty. She said it wasn't a slam dunk because the transfer had been technically authorized, but she said the circumstances mattered. And the fact that I'd been unreachable for documented, legitimate reasons, and that my parents had used a narrow window of my unavailability to make an $83,000 transfer without my knowledge was worth pursuing seriously. She asked if I wanted to send a demand letter or whether I wanted to go further. I thought about my mom's voice on the phone. We knew you'd understand, not we hope you'll understand, not we're so sorry, we had no choice. We knew, past tense, settled. Like my feelings on the matter had already been processed and filed away for me. I told Daphne I wanted to go further. By that evening, I was back in my apartment, and my sister had called 3 more times. I hadn't picked up. My brother sent a text saying Mom told me. I'm sorry, I didn't know they were going to do this. I read it and set the phone face down on the counter. I want to say something about my brother, because he's not the villain of this story, even though his mess is what triggered it. He'd made bad decisions with a business venture, the kind that looked reasonable from the outside until they didn't, and he was dealing with real legal consequences. I didn't want him to go to prison or lose everything, but he's a 40-year-old man. His catastrophe was not mine to fund without being asked. And the fact that my parents made that decision on my behalf, without my knowledge, in the 6 hours I was unavailable, told me something about how they'd always seen me that I probably should have recognized years earlier. The next morning, Daphne had filed a formal dispute with the bank and sent a demand letter to my parents requiring the return of the funds within 10 business days. She had also reached out to my brother's attorneys to put them on notice that the retainer funds were subject to a dispute and that they should not consider the matter settled. My father called me that afternoon. His tone was not what I expected. I'd been bracing for defensive, and instead I got disappointed. Like I was the one who'd done something wrong. He said he couldn't believe I'd gotten lawyers involved over a family decision. He said we were a family, and families pooled resources when someone was in trouble. He said my brother was his child too, and he wasn't going to just watch his son go through something like this alone. I told him that I was also his child. He didn't say anything for a moment. I told him that I had not been asked, that I had been unavailable for 6 hours at a legal proceeding, and in that window, he and my mom had moved $83,000 out of an account I'd been building for 7 years, including money that my grandmother had left specifically to me. I told him that what he'd done was not pooling resources. Pooling resources required asking first. He said they'd tried to reach me. I said I knew that. I said I'd been in a courthouse. I said this was not an emergency that couldn't have waited 6 hours or 6 days or long enough to have a conversation with me about it. He said the deadline was real. I said there are always options when you look for them. A smaller retainer, a payment plan, a personal loan from a bank. A conversation with me the week before, when the deadline was approaching and I could have weighed in on my own money. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, very flatly, that he expected me to drop the legal action because taking this further would damage the whole family. I told him I'd let my attorney handle communication going forward. My mom stopped calling me after that, which was its own kind of answer. She switched to text messages, and the messages started out explanatory and then became increasingly pointed. One of them said that she had given up a lot for me over the years, and she expected more loyalty than this. I read it, put my phone down, and went for a long walk around my neighborhood in the cold. Daphne had moved quickly. The demand letter had done something interesting. My brother's attorneys, now aware that the funds were disputed, had placed the retainer in a trust account pending resolution rather than drawing against it. That bought time and leverage. It also meant that my parents' plan hadn't fully executed, because the money wasn't yet spent. That narrow technical detail changed everything. 10 days passed. My parents did not return the funds. Daphne filed a civil complaint for breach of fiduciary duty and conversion. Conversion is a legal term for the unauthorized taking of someone else's property, even when the person doing the taking had some form of access. It's what distinguishes using a spare key to water someone's plants from using a spare key to remove their furniture. My brother called me. Not a text, an actual call, which I picked up because I still believed in giving people a chance to say the thing they were trying to say. He told me he felt terrible. He said he'd had no idea our parents were going to do this. He said he'd told them he didn't want the money handled this way. I believed him, mostly, though I also noticed that he hadn't returned the money either or told his attorneys to send it back. Feeling terrible is different from taking action. I told him I wasn't angry at him. I told him our parents had made a decision and I was responding to it. I told him I hoped his case worked out. I meant all of that. 6 weeks after the transfer, the case went to mediation. My parents showed up with a family friend who did estate work and apparently thought he could sub in as their representative, which was not how civil mediation functions. He was politely informed of this. My parents then showed up with an actual attorney who, based on everything Daphne told me later, had advised them privately that their position was weak. I wasn't in the room with them. I was in a separate room, as is standard in mediation. Daphne went back and forth. The first offer my parents made was that they'd pay me back half, over 2 years as a loan. I said no. The second offer was 70% over 1 year. I said no. The third offer, and I think the point at which their own attorney told them to stop, was the full $83,000, returned within 45 days, with a signed agreement that they would not contest it, in exchange for my dropping the civil complaint. I took it, not because I had forgiven them, not because I thought 45 days was fast enough, or that the signed agreement made us even. I took it because Daphne told me that going to trial would cost me time and money I didn't have, that the outcome wasn't guaranteed even though our position was strong, and that a guaranteed full return was better than a probable but not certain victory that would take another year of my life. I signed the agreement. I went home. I ate leftover soup and watched a documentary about deep-sea fish and went to bed. The money came back in 3 transfers over the following 6-ish weeks. Each transfer landed in my account with no note, no message, nothing attached. Just numbers appearing on a screen. My parents and I have not spoken since the mediation. That's been 7 months now. My sister texts me occasionally, short messages, carefully neutral. She's threading a needle I don't envy. My brother sent me a card in the spring. Handwritten, which I'll give him credit for. He said he was sorry for the chaos his situation had caused. He didn't mention the money specifically, But I think that was the only way he could write it without it being about him, and this particular card was supposed to be about me. I moved the money into a new account, an account that has exactly one name on it, mine. I've since looked into the specifics of limited versus general account authority, and I now have a formal written restriction on anyone who has any access to any of my accounts. My estate attorney, who helped me set this up, said she wished she'd met more people in their 30s who thought this carefully about these things. I told her it took an education. I've thought a lot about what the real injury was. Obviously, it was the money. $83,000, 7 years of steady, unglamorous saving, my grandmother's inheritance, that I'd kept careful track of because it felt like something I owed her. Yes, that was real. And losing it temporarily was genuinely destabilizing in a way I didn't fully let myself feel until the mediation was over, and I could finally afford to fall apart a little. But the money came back. What didn't come back, and what I'm still sorting through, is the understanding of how I'd been seen. That I was the one who could handle things, which meant I was the one things could be done to. That responsible meant available. That my 6 hours of unavailability during a federal courthouse proceeding were close enough to consent that my parents felt comfortable acting on them. That they'd had signing authority on my account for 3 years, and in all that time had apparently been deciding whether or not they might need to use it. I don't know when they started thinking about it. Maybe they never thought about it at all, until the crisis hit and they saw the door and walked through it. That might almost be worse, somehow, that it wasn't calculated, just reflexive. That the thought process was simply Ivy has money, we need money, we have access. That I'd been a resource before I was a person in that moment. If you're someone who added a family member to your accounts for convenience, or because you thought you were being careful, or because someone told you it was the responsible thing to do, please go look at what authority that actually gives them. Not the version you have in your head. The actual legal language in your actual account agreement. Because the distance between they can pay my bills if I'm incapacitated, and they can move my entire balance to fund my brother's attorney turned out to be nothing but paperwork I'd never read. I am not telling you to distrust your family. I'm telling you that trust is not a substitute for structure. The people who took my money were people who loved me, in whatever way they were capable of. That didn't stop them. And the thing that got my money back wasn't love either. It was documentation, a good attorney, and the willingness to treat my own financial life as something worth protecting, even when the people across the table were people I'd known my entire life. The condo I was saving for. I haven't stopped looking. The folder on my laptop is still there. I added a few new listings in March, a couple more in May. The number in my account is climbing again, slowly, the way it always has. $200 here, a little more there, a deposit from a bonus in the fall. It'll get there. I've done it before.